We're going to talk about the themes in your book, but there might be something else that people have got in their minds right now. So I think let's just deal with the tax question first. Ed Miliband was terribly disappointed you weren't here this morning. He mentioned it 2 or 3 times. But in case you missed it, he basically said you're not living up to your motto, that you are going to extraordinary lengths to avoid tax. He bought into the comparison with the banks, and he said you were wrong to describe your tax structure as just capitalism. So do you think you were wrong?
No. No, I think, first place, let me say thank you very much. You and I have done this for a number of years now, and I want to thank all of you guys for coming to Big Tent. We care a lot about freedom of expression, transparency, and so forth. In the tax controversy, as it's called, I think it's most important to know that Google feels very, very strongly that tax information, tax policies, and so forth should be done completely transparently. With respect to the current sort of issues, I don't think companies should decide what tax policy should be. I think governments should be. And all of us are operating in a very, very long-standing tax regime, which is set up for various reasons that don't necessarily make sense to me or anybody else, but they are the way the global tax regime works. I wrote a piece for The Observer, which came out on Sunday, which basically said we need to have a conversation about this, right? We're trying to do the right thing. We're not trying to do the wrong thing. And we completely endorse the idea of having a big debate at the G8, the G20, and so forth and so on. And people have to sort this out. The other thing we're concerned about is we don't want to be in a situation where we get triple or quadruple taxed. So if you're going to have international taxes, figure out how to do it and do it in a way that you're not getting multiple taxed. So the sum of all of this is, I think, frankly, we've now got the right thing going on. We've got a national discussion about taxes, and Google will absolutely follow the tax laws of the countries we operate in. We do.
I suppose the point he would make, though, is that that's passing the buck, that you have taken a choice in how you structure yourselves.
Taxes are not a choice.
Well, they are.
I disagree.
The way you structure your company is a choice, and the way you use transfer pricing is a choice, and he says that's wrong. And you're not simply passive players, just obeying a set of rules, neutrally. You've taken a decision to put a lot of money in Bermuda, and that's wrong. That's his point.
Well, again...
And you take moral decisions in all sorts of other areas of Google, and this is a moral decision too.
Again, the Google view here is that taxes should not be up to Google. Google is following the international tax regime. If the international tax regime changes, we will absolutely follow it.
Right, but do you accept that the decision you've taken to base yourselves in Ireland, to have transfer pricing that sends money to Bermuda, is a choice that you have taken as a company that you once described as that's capitalism? Because you want to minimize your tax.
Virtually all of the American companies have structures like this, and there are analogous structures for European countries that are companies that are operating in the United States. Right? This is how the international tax regime works. There's no question governments around the world need more money. Look at America. But the fact of the matter is that if we paid more taxes in one area, we paid less taxes in another. The international tax regimes have sorted this thing out into this structure.
You see, what it feels like to a lot of your critics, a lot of people watching who are paying their taxes, is that Google is in some way outmaneuvering the government. That you're saying, look, we comply with the law, you change the law, and we'll pay a bit more tax.
Well,
and then actually, you've outplayed them.
But governments have a lot more power than we do, right?
That's debatable.
We actually have to follow the law. And if the law changes, we will absolutely follow it.
So what about the amount of transfer pricing that you do? I mean, is that up for negotiation? Because your position is quite simple, as I understand.
With whom would we negotiate? We don't negotiate taxes. They are the law. You don't sit there and say, oh, this is my offer, that's your offer. But it's certainly not in democratic countries.
But it's about the transparency, isn't it? Will you say, for example, how much money you send to Bermuda?
We've actually described our entire tax structure because we're in favor of transparency.
In terms of numbers?
Absolutely.
So how much is it? How much is sitting there?
I don't know, but I don't personally know, but we've absolutely disclosed it.
But what about the proportion of money? Because what people, it's a very complicated structure, and a lot of people, ordinary taxpayers, don't get it. But what you do is you effectively pay a license. Well, let me ask the question.
Okay,
let me ask the question. What you effectively do is you pay a license for the use of Google technology, because you say, well, what Ireland sells doesn't belong to Ireland. And it is the amount.
This is like your interpretation of what we said. So go ahead.
Okay, well, you can correct me in a second. But basically, what you end up with is a huge amount of money leaving European tax jurisdictions and going off to Bermuda. And apparently, there's no tax paid on that money at all at the moment. And that, for the whole world, feels a little wrong.
So first place, that the no tax part is not true. Let's start over. We love the United Kingdom. It's a huge operation for us. We have 3,000 employees here. We're growing it to 5,000. We're doing a huge development in King's Cross. We have events like this, right? We care a lot about this. Google is free to the citizens of the United Kingdom, as it is free to citizens all around the world, right? So we work really, really hard to not only follow the rules, but also try to make the world a better place. So from my perspective, I look at this and I think we're following the tax regime.
But I don't get to choose how I contribute to Britain. I get a tax bill. And you're saying, well, we would rather invest in King's Cross, and we would rather invest in the East End. And a lot of people just say, can you just pay tax the same way the rest of us do?
Well, indeed, we do, similar to the way...
The same way is the operative phrase.
No, but again, the way the laws work. I can't defend the international tax regime. Both your government and we have said that it needs to be rethought. And trust me, I did not design such an irrational structure. It would not have been designed this way by a computer scientist, I can assure you. But the fact of the matter is that these are the rules.
Just finally on this, but it'll probably come up in the questions later on. But I mean, Ed Miliband said he will legislate unilaterally if he becomes prime minister.
If he does so, then we will follow the rules.
But he's not. All he's saying is actually we would legislate for transparency. Would that have any impact on Google's investment in Britain? Would you perhaps?
You're asking
less?
A specific question for.
Yeah, I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if Britain acted unilaterally to try and make you pay more, would that have any impact on how you invest?
Well, hopefully the law would not say the Google tax bill, right? Right. Hopefully taxes apply to everybody uniformly. So the debate over whether you raise taxes against companies and whether they then forward invest is one which is well beyond the subject of our interview. I have some personal opinions about this, but it's not a Google answer. The answer is Google will continue to invest in the UK no matter what you guys do, because the UK is just too important for us, right? The citizens are too important to us, and we in our view, provide too much good. We actually just love doing it. So my guess is that we will continue investing heavily in Britain no matter what.
I mean, I think this whole tax debate takes us really to the themes of your book, the two of you have done together, which is about how the world is almost, it's just not equipped to deal with the advances of the internet. And maybe tax is the first question on which the world has been bamboozled, doesn't know how to deal with it.
There's a long list of them in the book.
Well, one of the reasons we wrote the book is we were tired of this debate that has dominated the current discourse about is technology good or bad. While it's an intellectually interesting debate, it ignores the inevitability of 5 billion new people connecting to the internet in the future. And to your point about challenges, you mentioned tax, but if you look at where these next 5 billion people are coming online, it's parts of the world where there's huge poverty challenges, where there's tons of conflict, lots of instability, and where 57% of the world's population lives under governments that are in sort of governing in some degree of an autocratic fashion. And so our book looks at these next 5 billion, and Eric and I traveled to 30 plus countries together to go out and meet people in these environments who, by the way, are also going to comprise the vast majority of our future users, to try to understand the challenges they're facing and how they're unique relative to the 2 billion people who are already online today.
Do you have anything to add?
I agree.
Okay.
We'll also follow whatever the tax rules are.
Well, one of the things that you've raised and addressed is the whole question of, I mean, there are some big issues the world is going to have to change the way it thinks about, and one of them is privacy. And in a world where all our data is captured, where we might be wearing Google glasses or something similar and recording all sorts of stuff, our whole concept of what privacy is going to have to change or perhaps just disappear. Is now the time where privacy just disappears?
I think it's clear that privacy does not disappear, and we'll debate about the spelling and pronunciation of the word. I think that it's fair to say that it's difficult to separate privacy and security. Right? That, for example, I think each and every one of you completely expects Google to maintain the integrity of the data that you entrust with Google. It would be a huge problem if your personal information that's stored within Google was somehow leaked or inappropriately given to governments or what have you. That makes sense to me. I think also, however, you have a responsibility for judgment. The fact of the matter is that the internet has this property that it has data retention, that it tends to remember things. It's very difficult to delete things. So if you post things, they're unlikely to be deletable, right? So this is a problem for parents. My current favorite example is the gentleman who decided that it was a public service to publish the recipe to build a 3D printable gun that's undetectable. Now, this gentleman sees himself as a hero. So the US government decided that this was munitions, asked it to be removed, it was removed. This information is now all around the world, and it's essentially undeletable because it's stored in all sorts of different places. People will die because this gentleman, and I call him that with derision, decided that it was a clever idea. So you really want to be careful about the fact that there's information that once published, very, very difficult to delete, especially if it's dangerous, right? If it can hurt people and kill people.
And if I can add one thing to this, one of the arguments that we make in the book is whether you're living in London or you're living in Saudi Arabia, there's a common trend throughout the world where kids are coming online younger and faster than any other time in history. I mean, this is the era where people put their sonograms online. So technically...
Hey, Jared, you should talk about this.
Well, because I'm very upset about it.
Jared is extremely concerned about digital identity. He believes that digital identity should be defined at birth and not before.
Well, I believe that an infant should at least have to squint or burp in consent of their sonogram being online, which of course they can't do.
Because if you think about it, your digital identity gets started, presumably at birth there's no identity at all. It's like you're born, except the sonogram issue, which is sort of the next major crisis in Jared's life, presumably. And so what happens is that as you age, more and more of your digital identity is determined by others, by what they say about you and what you do. And that indelible record is something that this new generation will probably live with for the rest of their lives.
Well, and of course, the implications of this, to sort of move from sonograms to a more serious point, although we do care about it. So kids are coming online and saying things that are going to be permanent and could follow them around for the rest of their lives, and they're doing so in a way that's faster than their physical maturation process. So in a place like London, the argument we make in the book is parents should talk to their kids about the importance of data permanence, privacy, and security years before it's relevant to talk to them about sex and the birds and the bees. In a place like Saudi Arabia, to take an even more serious example, imagine the parents of a 9-year-old girl who's online and saying and doing all kinds of things online that at the time might not matter, but could have implications in the long term. So let's say she's talking to members of the opposite sex, and she says something that in the future could follow her around as a digital scarlet letter with serious implications when she becomes a late teenager. So in that context, the parents have to talk to the child about all of the laws and sort of intricacies around gender discrimination in Saudi Arabia, probably years before she's able to even comprehend what that means in the long term.
Go on.
What I was going to say is that I think the punchline on this privacy question is that I think we need to fight for privacy or we're going to lose it, because it's so easy to lose it now, for the reasons that Jared was identifying.
And I mean, because the other thing you've been talking about is the whole question of the next 5 billion users. What you're going to have is people, I mean, we already have it in the developed world, that people embracing the internet at different speeds and at different depths. But that's going to be accentuated more, isn't it, as you have people in poor countries getting online at a faster rate. In a different way, it'll probably be through mobile rather than through broadband networks and all the rest of it. Do you think that, how will people cope with, because the privacy questions or the privacy questions will all be the same wherever you are, no matter how different your level of engagement is?
Well, let me give a specific counterexample, because in some environments where we've traveled, people actually feel more secure online. So this may sound like an obscure example, but it's one that had a profound impact on both Eric and me. When we were in Pakistan, we met a group of women who had been attacked with acid by the Taliban. and it left horrible disfiguration of their faces. And in the aftermath of such an atrocious crime, through no fault of their own, the scars that these women bear carry horrific consequences in the physical world that make it unsafe for them, that carry a stigma, that essentially make the physical world unlivable. So we went to visit these women. They all live in a house together. They're all learning technical skills. They're online. And what the internet has essentially done is given them a second life in an environment where physical scars are invisible. It's given them a second chance. One of them was even able to meet a man that she eventually married in the real world. So you talk to people in these sorts of environments, and you realize it's not necessarily as simple as the sort of way that we talk about it in the context of the first 2 billion. And that's just one example, but of course there's many.
Let me move us on. We've had sessions this morning that have looked at where human beings go, and in a world where you've got robots and automation and jobs changing. I mean, in your travels, where have you ended up thinking about the future for humans? Are we all going to sit around while everything is automated, wondering how we're going to raise money?
There's a lot of sort of historic scenarios people would claim that I think do not hold up in observation. I think the first claim that people make is that somehow the internet is a great leveler and everyone will be the same. And we conclude, after spending lots of time on this, that the internet improves pretty much everybody. There are no countries that have gotten worse because of the arrival of the internet. That for developing worlds, the arrival of the internet, in particular the mobile phone, is a huge change, right? It's the first access they have to medical information, education, entertainment. These are things which matter to them far more than the internet matters to us today. However, at the same time, the developed world, here in Britain, the gap actually gets greater between the developed and the developing world, because the developed world races ahead with gigabit networks, very sophisticated AI systems that help you get through your day. So it's absolutely true, right, that these tools help everybody. They help us at some level proportionally more because we have more bandwidth, we have just better networks, better infrastructure. I also think that this notion that somehow these machines, if you will, replace us, and that they introduce a notion of sort of leisure, the leisure class, which is sort of the Thorstein Veblen theory from 100 years ago, is also wrong. The evidence is that these tools are used primarily to make the world more productive, greater innovation, greater job creation. And there's a sort of whole meme of people who wander around saying, oh, as a result, there'll be no jobs, where jobs are losing to machines and so forth. That appears to be completely false, right? There are new winners and new losers, and the winners are winners who are primarily the educated ones. And so what you want to do is you want to be on the side of educated people who are sophisticated and so forth, as evidenced by the way Britain works.
And one of the things to add to this, Eric and I, a couple months ago, we visited Myanmar or Burma. It sort of depends who you're talking to, what you call it. Less than 1% of the population has access to the internet Yet every single person that we talked to had heard of the internet, and even though they'd never used it as a resource or as a tool, they understood it as a set of values and as a concept. And they associated it with free assembly, they associated it with free speech and free expression. And what we realize is all throughout the world, where you look at these environments where 5 billion new people are coming online, what knowledge of the internet is doing is it's raising expectations within populations about what civil liberties they're entitled to.
But Jared, on Monday, you had a meeting with the president of Estonia here, right? Describe Estonia.
So Estonia is an interesting example. Here's a country, 1.3 million people, with a very difficult and challenging Cold War legacy. In Estonia, in the physical world, I'm not sure if they have a military or not. If they do, it's small. The economy is small. By all accounts, it's certainly not a physical world powerhouse. But in cyberspace, citizens are able to do everything online, from pay their taxes. 25% of the population votes online. They're working with the Finns to potentially explore an interoperable system between the two countries. They're providing cybersecurity to all these countries in transition, from Libya to Myanmar to Tunisia. By all accounts, Estonia, while being small in the physical world, is functioning in our system as a cyber superpower. And what that means is every state in the future in a world that's more connected will have the opportunity to punch above their weight in cyberspace if they make the right decisions around free expression, if they might make the right decisions around transparency and accountability. And from our perspective, this is exciting because it levels the international playing field.
Okay. I think it's time to throw it open to people in the room. If we can lift the lights a little bit. Hand shot up at the back. Yes. Could you tell us who you are, and could we get a microphone? Just keep your hand up so the microphone can get to you.
Hi there, my name's Emma Carr. I'm from a civil liberties campaign group called Big Brother Watch. You've spoken a lot about privacy, which is fantastic. However, I'm slightly concerned about the rhetoric that you've been using. You've had legal proceedings in both America and Europe about your privacy policies and the way that you're using data. You have to remember that data is an important part of the way that you raise money for Google. And so we had a poll that showed that 66% of adults in the UK that were polled wanted EU data regulators to do more to help protect our privacy online. So I wanted to know how you put individual responsibility in terms of the data that we put online and how that goes against, we need to know what you're doing with our data online and how much you share about how you're using our data.
So this may be a case where we disagree with the interpretation of what's going on. We try to be as transparent as possible on what we do with people's data. And historically, we were pretty siloed with respect to what we were doing. So we essentially made a relatively broad statement of these are the things that we can do with your data. We did this about a year ago. And this was very widely covered. The media was obsessed about it. It was discussed for months. Literally anyone who cares about privacy would have read this and understood it. So from our perspective, we disclosed what we were doing. So now we're being criticized for not disclosing what we're doing. So there must be another criticism. And my interpretation of this is that there's concern that somehow we're going to misuse this data and we're not telling you, which I can assure you is not the case. That we're very committed to telling you what we do. There seems to be a separate concern that we use the data at all, but it's how our systems work, right? It's how we're able to afford the data centers, the services that are free, and so forth. So we're sort of caught in between the sort of rhetorical points. But I can assure you from a privacy perspective, if we were to violate your privacy in a way that was material, we would lose you, and we would not get you back. So independent of whether you like us, and independent of whether you think that Larry and Sergey and I and the others are moral or immoral or what have you, depending on your view, we have a straight, and hopefully you have a positive view, but I'll let you decide. We have a clear business incentive to protect your privacy, because if we violate it, we will lose you. Furthermore, if we do it, the Europeans and the US will in fact write laws that will in fact restrict our actions. So there are many reasons to think that your privacy is protected. We say it, we do it, we suffer a penalty if we break it, we lose you as a customer, we will get regulated, and we will get sued to death, because we get sued on everything. And I think that's sort of roughly how it's going to play out. I think that this conversation is really a metaphor for the issues that are discussed in the book, which is people are genuinely concerned about the data that's being collected for them. And as I said earlier with Jared, we need to fight for our privacy because it will get taken from us over time. And by the way, not from Google, but from others who have other agendas.
Yes, Chris Schmidt.
Thanks, Krishnan. Chris Ship from ITV News. It is a tax question, as you might well expect, Eric. You have just said that tax is a matter for governments, not for Google. Ed Miliband, the Labour leader who wants to be in government, said on that very stage this morning he's disappointed in your company, that he thinks you're wrong. The Deputy Prime Minister, who is in government, cornered you on Monday and said you should be paying your fair share. So my question is this: what will it take for you to change your tax arrangements?
As I indicated, we will absolutely change our tax arrangements based on how the law changes.
So will it take a change in the law from this government for you to change your tax? And if
well, or the governments in which we operate in many countries in the ways that you're describing.
And if that does happen, you will change your tax
of course.
arrangements?
Yeah, we follow the law.
It's a question, Chris, not an interview. Sorry. No, we've got lots of people with their hands up. Come on.
Do you describe your tax arrangements as
Chris,
unethical?
Enough.
No, I don't. Go ahead.
Yes, gentleman there.
Thanks very much, Philip Blond. Ed Miliband at the his speech earlier today said that we're going to have an ombudsman to try and tackle market dominance on the internet. And my concern about that is I don't know that of any successful measure that can tackle market dominance on the internet. And the internet seems to increase market power, and if you're a dominant player, the internet makes you even more dominant. What would your advice be to governments that wanted to tackle that issue? How do you think they should go about approaching that? Because any government that favours a free market, that favours open and multiple ownership, needs to address it. What would you advise them to do?
I'm not familiar with how the laws work in the UK in this matter. I'm highly familiar with the European laws, because we're spending lots of time with the EU Commission in Brussels on this stuff. So any answer I give would be contingent upon Brussels, EU law, and so forth, beating any answer I would give you. I think in general, the internet, I disagree with your statement about market dominance and the internet, because the internet is much more porous than people believe. If you take a look at the dominant companies, your word, not mine, of the PC industry, they are not the leaders today in the internet age. Thank goodness from my perspective. And it's pretty easy to lose your word dominance on the internet age as consumer patterns shift, as taste shifts, and so forth. And all of us in this industry face that. This is the one click away problem. People can move pretty easily. Furthermore, I would tell you that in Google's case, take a look at Android, 900 million users. We're dramatically happy with that. It's an extraordinary achievement at a technological level. We achieve that by giving away the open source code and letting you modify it in any way you wish. That's a pretty courageous act on our part. It's difficult to maintain dominance when you give everything away to all your competitors, again, using your words. So I would argue that the framing you used I disagree with. Should the government appoint an ombudsman, I'm sure we would work with them. And again, I would hope that they would understand that networks and the internet have this competitive aspect that I'm describing.
At the back, yeah. And if I can ask you to all to keep them brief, because we've only got a couple of minutes.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Mark McAndrew, Charity Engine. How long before Google Now passes the Turing test?
Google Now is, everybody knows that Google Now attempts, if you enable it, to make helpful suggestions. So at the moment, Google Now is trying to figure out where I live. And since I'm on a book tour, it's a little confused. But once it figures out where you live, it will suggest, this is your home, this is your office, this is how long it's going to take, and so forth. It is really quite clever. Within AI, there's a lot of artificial intelligence. There's something called the Turing test, invented here by Alan Turing, which is essentially a test where you have questions and you can't tell the answer. You can't tell whether the answer is a human or a computer. There's a lot of people who believe that the technology that's underlying the IBM Watson effort that technology approach has a good chance of passing the Turing test in the next 5 to 10 years. And I think that's very exciting.
Stella.
Thank you. Hi, Eric. I'm Stella Creasy. I'm an MP. I think we recognise that obviously our taxation system in the UK, our taxation systems internationally are struggling to keep up with the way in which technology is changing and the way in which value is created. So I want to ask for your help. In the way that we ask sometimes poachers to help gamekeepers, how would you reform our tax system to take account of these difficulties?
Let me give a personal answer and not a Google answer, because I don't know Google's answer. When you have very highly differential marginal tax rates, where the absolute tax income varies a great deal, you're going to have widely divergent outcomes. You have this in the United States, where the states have very different tax policies and they compete. There's one point of view that this competition among the states within the US and perhaps in Europe as well is good, because it forces a certain amount of pressure on governments to moderate their sort of tax increases and expenses. There's another point of view that these differences reflect differences in outcomes. And this is a very big fight within the economics community. So from our perspective, the most important thing to do is to have a rational system that's predictable and doesn't change very much, because we can adapt to kind of any structure. I don't think it's reasonable for people who have said that taxes should be the same everywhere, because taxes are a creation of culture over many decades.
If you look at Ireland, Ireland has had this sort of low tax regime for 50 years, right? They didn't arrive at it recently. There are reasons why they chose that. I don't know the reasons. I wasn't around at the time.
And very briefly, yes. Last few seconds.
Hi, Eric. I'm a barrister. I don't know if you know the distinction. Hashim Ahmed is a lawyer. Now, I'm going to just press you one more time on this question of the tax. And I'm going to ask you a specific question about the laws. And you've said that you will comply with the laws. But let me ask you this. Will you comply with the spirit of the law as well? And if so, what does that actually mean to you? Because the letter and the spirit are very different things.
So you have me at a disadvantage because you're a barrister. So you'll have to explain to me this distinction because I'm taking a relatively straightforward view of the law that one has to follow it, that it's not optional.
If this is on.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I can try and keep it as very. I could write an essay about the spirit of the law, but I'll keep it very brief. And it's to say this. I'll give you an example of barristers. When you have somebody comes in to say to you, I will restructure your finances so that you get to keep 82% of your earnings. I've had accountants come to me and say that. 82% of your earnings, and HMRC will only really keep what's the rest. That means that I'm still keeping up with the letter of the law because they've restructured this. But the spirit of the law says, as a barrister, I should be in that high bracket of paying above 40 to 50%. And then I'm making a choice to decide how to restructure my finances to keep HMRC away from my money or not. So the question is, if you are given that opportunity to restructure your finances so that you're abiding by the spirit of the letter of the law, but not the spirit, which choice do you say Google should make?
So the answer is more complicated because we're governed by United States securities law, and it would be very important that if we were to do something like that, that it was properly disclosed and it was properly accounted for. And I'm concerned in the scenario you're describing that it would be seen as, from a US perspective, incompetence, that you didn't do the proper thing with respect to this process, and also that you could reclassify some of that as a contribution in a different way. So you've now exhausted my understanding of international tax law, but I'm suggesting to you that the scenario you described, which I think is a perfectly reasonable discussion within a country, is far more complicated because the laws don't necessarily agree. And at the end of the day, we're governed by many such legal jurisdictions, not just the United Kingdom's.
And there's a cultural difference as well, isn't there? I mean, perhaps that's what was behind your comment about capitalism. In America, that's praised. That's a moral good. In Europe, people are more ambivalent about it.
I don't want there to be any confusion. Google is a capitalist company. We make we actually make profits, and we're proud of it. And those profits, by the way, deliver tremendous value. They allow us to have this event, which is very important. And it allows us to market the ideas of open expression. It makes Google essentially free to the majority of the citizens of the world. It allows us to do the kind of innovation that we're describing. And so it's easy to say that you would like us to have, as a company, less profits and have those profits be somewhere else, but that has a cost, right? And so my primary message, since you asked before, was we will absolutely comply with the letter of the law. We are trying to avoid situations where we're doubly and triply taxed, which would ultimately affect the amount of investment that we can make in the things that we're talking about. We did not have a chance to talk about sort of the wild and crazy stuff that Google is doing now and some of the future stuff, but I'm sure we'll have other opportunities to do that.
A visit that probably wasn't how you envisaged it a few weeks ago. It's been overtaken by events slightly, but Eric Schmidt, Jared Cohen, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you all.